Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video you will learn such React hook as useEffect, and this is the second most popular hook after useState, but it is the most complex and of course most versatile. And make sure that you watch this video until the end, because I will share a lot of advanced stuff, as well as we will build the real example. So let's jump right into it. So here I have already generated create React app, and as you can see it's completely empty. So here I simply have empty index.js and app.js with h1 line. And if you don't know what is create React app or how to generate an empty project with it, I already made a video on it, so go check it out first. Now the first question is, what is useEffect? It's a special hook that, how you can understand from the name, helps us to do side effects. What are side effects? For example, working with API is side effect, writing to local storage, working with DOM directly, or any stuff which is not really doing something inside React. So all this stuff are side effects, and we need to do them with caution, because React doesn't know anything about them. Let's check on the example. For example, we are clicking on the button and we want to change the title of our page here on the top. And actually it is already a side effect because we are working with document, and this is some part that is related to side effects. So first of all we need to import our useState hook. And if you don't know how useState hook is working, I already made a video on that. So I will link it here on the top and down in the description box below. So let's import here useState hook like we did previously from React. And now we want to create some state, for example for a counter. So here we are creating our count and our setter setCount. And we're getting inside useState the default value, which is 0. Now inside under our h1 we can write, for example, a button, and here we have our onClick event. And inside this onClick we want to increase our counter. This is why here we will have setCount, and here will be count plus 1. Now let's close this button and write inside click me. Let's check if it's working. Also we want here to console log somewhere counter. So here will be our count, of course with brackets. And now let's check. As you can see in browser, our counter is 0 because this is the default value. Now when we are clicking, we are getting increased counter. So everything is working. Now let's also write here render, just to see when our render of the component is happening. As you can see on initialize it is once because of this default value, and then on every click we're having render. Now the question is how we can set a title inside document, and for this we need to import here our new hook useEffect. And now here is how we're using it. So just inside our function, we're writing useEffect, and we're just simply calling it. And inside we need to pass a function. So just an anonymous function, and here we want to write document title equals, and here for example you clicked. And here will be our count times. So let's check if it's working. When we're reloading a page, you can see in browser already you clicked 0 times. Now we're clicking, and as you can see our title changes every time when the browser re-renders the component. So how it is working? So we're using here useEffect hook, and inside we're passing an empty function, and we're doing something here. We can do here whatever we want, but normally we are doing here some side effects, for example, like working with document. So what is happening? First of all, we are clicking on the button, then we have setCount, and this setCount re-renders our page. And every time with every re-render, this useEffect happens. But here is the thing that you need to remember. If we will write here useEffect and check in browser, this is really important. First of all, we have a render console log, and after we have useEffect. And it's not just after render, but it is after our component was fully rendered. And this is super important because we need to know that all properties and everything in our components, all elements are already ready. So useEffect happens after fully rendering of our component. This is why every time when we are clicking here, you can see that first of all render happened and then useEffect. Now, maybe you want to ask why we have such a strange notation. So we are simply calling a function directly inside component, actually without any structure. So we didn't move it inside function or something, we simply call everything in root. And actually there is a purpose for it. We are doing it inside our component to get access to all our local things that we have, and normally we have them from our state. In this case, we don't need to write anything additionally, but useEffect simply has access to all our local variables. And the same like with useState, you can't really nest useEffect, pack it inside if conditions, or inside some closures or functions. Your next question is probably why we simply don't write document title without useEffect at all inside our function. And there are two variants why we don't need to do this. First of all, we are not doing it because we want to do it after our component was rendered. And as you already saw, first of all, our component is rendered, and after our component was fully rendered, we are doing our useEffect. So in this case, we are sure that we are doing it afterwards. This is important for us. The second point is that we can trigger useEffect not on every render. But just to remind you, here you can see render and useEffect. So every time when render happened, we have useEffect. Obviously, sometimes we want to write some logic to not call useEffect on every render. And we can do it with dependency array. So actually, the first parameter of useEffect is an anonymous function, and the second parameter is an array. So here we have round brackets, and we can pass something inside. So first of all, this is a dependency array, which means our useEffect is dependent on all properties which are written in this array. So for example, we can write here count, and this means that actually our useEffect is dependent on count, which means it will be triggered only when our counter changes. So when we reload the page, you can see here useEffect because actually we set default state. Now we're clicking again and you can see render and useEffect because our counter changed. And actually you don't see any difference because we have only single state. So let's copy it and write here, for example, counter 2 or 22. Let's make 2. And here set count 2. And now I will just copy the button. And here on click, I will do set count 2. And here will be count 2 and click me 2. Let's reload the page. So here I have second button. And now, as you can see, we have useEffect. This is actually useEffect from this first setting of count. Now when I'm clicking click me 2, as you can see, we have render here because actually render happens after every use state, but we don't see useEffect because now useEffect happens only after count was changed. So this is our dependency array, and this is super important. Very often we want to do something only when only one state was changed. In this case, we're clicking here, click me, and we're changing this document. And actually it makes a lot of sense. Just imagine that we have here not 2 states, but like 10 maybe. And then we have useEffect and we're triggering this useEffect maybe with heavy logic every time. And we don't need to do it every time. Because actually here we're using only count, which means actually this useEffect needs to be dependent only on count. This is why here is our dependency array and we are providing inside count. The next question is actually the most popular question regarding useEffects. How can I fetch data or do something on initialize of the component? And actually all tutorials will say for you, you simply need to provide as a dependency empty array, like this. And then, as you can see after reload, you will have useEffect only first time on the first render. Now it doesn't matter where we're clicking, this useEffect will never happen. And yes, actually it is true, but it is completely wrong mindset. because we need to change our mindset and we need to understand that we are not writing classes anymore. And actually your mindset with React hooks is completely different. We should not think about lifecycle like we have it in classes. So we don't have now this component did mount, update, and so on. Here we have just effects. And actually we're describing our components like a reactive flow. So we're just defining how our components will change if this or that property is changed. Which is actually meaning in here, as you can see in useEffect, if we're providing here empty array, we're simply saying that our useEffect doesn't have any dependencies. And if it doesn't have any dependencies, it won't be retriggered again. So it's not like it is not happening at all because it was happened on initialize. It is like we don't have any dependencies. This is why it was not triggered again. And here is one important moment. As you can see here, we have a warning. So React hook useEffect has a missing dependency count. So actually this is the linting from React hooks, and it really helps us to write better code with React hooks. And it is really simple to write bad code with React hooks. First of all, when we are using some local properties inside useEffect, but we are not telling explicitly React that we use them. For example, if we simply remove here everything, this is the problem because we didn't say that we have some dependencies. We used here our count, which is our local property. This is why we must provide here count as a dependency. We just must do it, and then our React hooks will work correctly. And you will get a lot of nasty bugs if you won't do that, if you will provide here not all dependencies that you used inside, because in this case React can't understand what properties were changed. Now let's make a real example of fetching data, because actually it's the most popular usage of useEffect, and you need to fetch data or work with API in almost every project. And obviously I don't want to build an API from scratch. This is why I highly recommend to use JSON Server. What is this? This is actually a tool to build a fake API really quickly. So what we need to do first is install it globally. So simply write in console npm install globally JSON Server, and then I can write here in the console JSON Server, for example, ---- version, and if you are getting some version, then everything is fine. Now the next step is to create db.json in the root. Actually, the idea is that this is our database, and a JSON server can update this file like a database. So what we want to do here is to jump inside our root project and create new file here with the name db.json. And now inside we can create some data. Actually, this is just a simple JSON, and as you can see here in the example, we have keys. So each key is actually an entity. So let's say that we want to create users. So this is why the key is users, and this is the array. Now let's create several users. And actually this is JSON, this is why we need to write here everywhere quotes. And here will be ID1, and now for example we have name, use, state, hook. And let's name it maybe not users but posts, because it makes more sense. Now I will copy the first post and paste it here, and let's rename it. So here will be ID2, and here will be useEffect hooks. And actually our database is already ready, and we can start it. So here is how we can do it. JSON server, watch, and then db.json. And then this database will be served as our API. But here is the problem. We are starting our Create React app on 3000 port. And actually JSON server also wants 3000 port. This is why we can write here JSON server. And as you can see here, ---- watch. And here we can provide also port, for example, whatever port you want. So here, as you can see, we have now resources, localhost 3004/posts. And if you open it in browser, you can see this is just normal data, like normal API. So we have here /posts, and this is get for all our data. And we can also get data by ID, for example, or use put, patch, or delete, just like with normal API. And JSON server will change our data in db.json. So this is really convenient for small testing. So now our API is ready and we want to fetch this URL. And for this in React we need to install some package because out of the box there is no way to fetch data from React. And the most popular package to fetch data is Axios. Actually not only for React, but in any case for browser and Node, so we need to install it first. So let's jump in console and write here yarn add Axios, or if you are using npm install Axios, and now we can use it inside our application, for example in source app. First of all, we need here to import Axios from Axios, and now we want to use it inside our useEffect instead of, for example, this document title. So let's remove everything from here. And here we have now only console log, and we want to fetch data. So we want here to write Axios get, and here will be our URL that we want to fetch. In our case, it's localhost 3004/post. And now we can write here then, and we're getting a result, which is actually a response. And now, first of all, we want here to console log our result. The problem is here that our code now will be run on every render, because actually here we didn't provide dependency array, and by default it means that it will be run on every render. Obviously we don't want to fetch some data from API on every render. But actually we can get an infinite loop, and this is even worse. So if here we are trying to set something like some data, for example set count, then we will have an infinite loop. Why it is happening? Because here we have render, after our render we have useEffect, and inside useEffect on success we are setting our state. And when we are setting state we are causing render, and then useEffect will be triggered again after render. So this is the infinite loop. Obviously we don't want to have an infinite loop, this is why we really need to think what we are calling when. In this case we want to call useEffect only once on initialize. This is why here we can provide empty array, and now we can simply write this thread that we have inside some state. But first of all let's at least console log it. So let's jump in browser, reload the page. As you can see we have render, then after rendering we have useEffect, and here you can see our response. Actually this is the response from Axios, and for us the interesting part is data. So this is exactly the data that we got from our API. So now we want to set this data inside some state. Let's remove this setCount2 and change it inside for users. So we want here to set, actually it wasn't users, it was posts. So let's write here posts, and here will be set posts. And here we will use useState, and by default the array of the posts is empty. Now here when we're getting the response, we want to write setPosts, so we are setting inside response.data. And this is the array of posts. And now here we can simply render posts just like normal data. So here we can just write a normal loop. So for this we can write post.map, and here we are mapping every post. So we have post and we want to return some markup. So here will be div, and inside we want to render post.title. Let's check now in browser. When we reload the page, we're getting a warning that we need to provide a key. So here we didn't provide it. This is why inside div we need to say that key is post.id. So here is key, not kid. Now let's reload the page. As you can see, we don't have any errors, but we don't see our posts. Let's check what we have in posts. So here we can simply console log posts, and now we're seeing posts after every render. So let's check this in console. As you can see, the data is there. First of all, it's empty array, and then we're getting the array of data. But here it is ID and name and not title. So here will be post.name. Let's check in browser, and now as you can see, our data from API is successfully rendered. So this is exactly the example how we can use fetch inside useEffect to fetch some data on initialize. So these were the most important knowledge that you need to know regarding useEffect hooks. And if this video was too easy for you, I have a full advanced React hooks course which is going 8 hours, where we're building the full application from start to the end. And I will link it down in the description box below, as well as links to all my other courses. And if you like this video and you want more content like this, don't forget to put thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And if you didn't like this video, just try to watch it again on increased speed. And I will see you in my next video.